You probably have this in your kitchen. You sprinkle it on your food without a second thought. A mundane crystal so common, so cheap, we treat it as virtually worthless. It's on every dinner table, in every restaurant, a humble afterthought to any meal. We think we know salt, but we really don't. What if I told you this simple mineral was once a weapon of war, a tool of empire, the foundation of unimaginable wealth and the trigger for bloody revolutions? This isn't just seasoning. This is history. For thousands of years, this was not salt. This was white gold. Empires were built on its trade. Armies marched on salaries paid in it. Entire economies were structured around its control, and when that control became too oppressive, it sparked rebellions that toppled kings and shattered colonial rule. The story of salt is the hidden story of human civilization, a tale of power, greed, and the ferocious struggle to control something essential for life itself. This is the story of the Salt Wars, and the brutal monopolies that turned a simple white crystal into the ultimate source of power. We are biologically hardwired to need it. The sodium ions in salt are responsible for firing the synapses in our brain, contracting our muscles, and keeping the delicate balance of fluids in every cell of our bodies. Without it, we simply cannot live. A human needs a certain amount of it every day just to survive. This biological necessity creates something economists call a perfectly inelastic demand. There are no substitutes. You can't replace salt with sugar or with sand. You either have it or you die. And for 99% of human history, long before refrigerators and canning, this biological need was dwarfed by an even greater one: preservation. In a world without reliable cooling, food spoiled. A successful hunt or a bountiful harvest could rot within days, leading to a cycle of feast and famine. Protein, the very building block of muscle and energy, was transient. You couldn't store it. You couldn't transport it. And without a way to preserve food, you couldn't build cities, sustain armies, or create a complex society. This was one of the fundamental problems of civilization, and the solution was salt. Salt is a desiccant. It draws water out of organic tissue, killing the bacteria and mold that cause decay. A fish packed in salt, or a leg of pork cured in it, could last for months, even years. Suddenly, food wasn't just for today. It was for the winter. It wasn't just for your village. It could be shipped 1,000 miles away. Salt was the ancient world's energy storage. It transformed perishable protein into a stable, tradable, long-lasting commodity. This discovery was a monumental technological leap for early civilizations. With salted food, you could feed a standing army on the march. You could support dense urban populations far from agricultural centers. You could survive a drought or a failed harvest. The ability to preserve food was the ability to plan, to grow, and to conquer. And so, this simple white crystal, harvested from the sea or chipped from the earth, became one of the most valuable commodities on the planet. But how did a simple rock become so precious? The answer lies not in its use, but in its control. Whoever controlled the salt controlled the food supply, and whoever controlled the food supply controlled the people. The age of the salt monopoly had begun. No empire understood the power of salt better than Rome. To the Romans, salt wasn't just a commodity. It was the bedrock of their military and economic dominance. It was the fuel that powered the legions, and a key resource that helped build their sprawling capital. The story of Rome's rise is, in many ways, the story of its mastery over white gold. The Romans built their empire on the backs of their soldiers, and those soldiers marched on a diet heavily reliant on salted provisions. Salted pork, fish, and olives were the military rations that could withstand long campaigns in foreign lands, far from the fertile fields of Italy. Without a steady, massive supply of salt, the expansion of the Roman Empire would have been logistically impossible. An army can't conquer on an empty stomach, and salt ensured Roman stomachs were never empty for long. But salt was more than just food preservation. It was tied to a soldier's worth. The very word salary comes from the Latin salarium, which originally may have referred to an allowance for Roman soldiers to purchase salt. This connection shows how valuable salt was, a tangible and essential part of their service to the Republic, and later, the Empire. To be worth one salt became a common phrase, a direct reflection of this vital mineral's importance. A soldier who performed his duties well was literally worth his ration of this precious substance. So, let's follow the money. While Rome didn't have a state-run monopoly in the same way China did, it absolutely understood how to profit from this inelastic demand. The state controlled the most significant salt works, like the massive salt pans at Ostia, the port of Rome, and would take over the industry when traders drove prices too high. To facilitate this crucial trade, the Romans constructed one of their very first great roads, the Via Salaria, the Salt Road. This ancient highway stretched 242 kilometers from Rome to the Adriatic coast, a testament in stone and gravel to the mineral's central importance. For centuries, tons of salt traveled along this road, destined to feed and fund the largest city in the ancient world. The scale of this operation was staggering. Rome, with a population of over 1 million people, had an insatiable appetite for salt. The state's control of key sources and distribution routes ensured a constant revenue stream. The state could influence the price of a product that no one could live without. This generated emperor-level revenues, which were funneled directly into funding the legions, constructing monumental architecture, and paying for the administration of a vast empire. This model was brutally effective, and it wasn't unique to Rome. Across the globe, in China, the Han Dynasty implemented a state salt monopoly in 119 BC. This monopoly became so profitable that it was a major source of government revenue, at times second only to the land tax. During certain periods after the Han Dynasty fell, salt could account for a staggering 80% to 90% of some kingdoms' revenues. These funds were used to finance massive public works, most notably the construction and fortification of the Great Wall of China. The system was similar. The state set the price, and licensed merchants sold it at a huge markup to consumers who had no other choice. But where there is monopoly, there is smuggling. In China, the high prices created a thriving black market, with salt smugglers, often operating as organized bandits, siphoning off a significant portion of the trade. These smuggling networks would, at times, become so powerful that they funded rebellions against the very imperial authority whose taxes created their illicit industry. Rome, China, the pattern was the same. Salt was not just a preserver of food. It was a builder of empires and a funder of armies. The Via Salaria was more than a road. It was an artery of power, pumping the lifeblood of the empire. White, crystalline, and absolutely essential, from the periphery to the heart. The Romans had helped create a system of economic exploitation so perfect that it would be envied, feared, and emulated for centuries to come. They proved that one of the easiest ways to control millions of people was to control the one thing they could not live without. As the Roman Empire crumbled, its centralized control over the salt trade dissolved with it. But the value of salt did not. In the centuries that followed, the hunger for white gold didn't just continue. It escalated, sparking new and vicious conflicts. The heirs to Rome's Salt Playbook were not great empires, but ambitious city-states, and none pursued the salt trade with more cunning and ruthlessness than the Republic of Venice. Nestled in its lagoon, Venice had no land to farm. Its very existence depended on trade, and from its earliest days, it recognized salt as the key to its prosperity. The savvy merchants of Venice quickly realized a profound truth. It was far more profitable to control the trade of salt than to produce it themselves. This shift in strategy transformed Venice from a regional producer into a global power. The city began to import salt from vast salt pans across the Mediterranean. They established a powerful state body, the Magistrato al Sal, or the Salt Magistracy, to oversee every aspect of the trade. This institution enforced a rule known as the Ordo Salis, which required every Venetian trading vessel returning to the city to carry a quota of salt, ensuring a constant, massive supply. This salt was then stored in enormous warehouses, the Saloni, built with reinforced walls to bear the immense weight of the precious mineral. With this vast supply under its control, Venice could act as the salt broker for half of Europe. But this wasn't free trade. It was a monopoly enforced by the might of the Venetian navy. Venetian warships patrolled the Adriatic, which they called Mare di Venezia, the Sea of Venice, boarding merchant ships to ensure that no illicit salt challenged their dominance. They became the gatekeepers of white gold. This aggressive posture inevitably led to war. Venice's primary rival was Genoa, another maritime power with its own ambitions. The competition between them was fierce, erupting into a series of brutal conflicts. A quintessential example was the Salt War of 1304, a brief but bloody conflict fought against the nearby city of Padua. When Padua attempted to establish its own salt pans, directly challenging Venice's monopoly, Venice's reaction was swift and merciless. They declared war, routed Padua's forces, and completely destroyed their salt works, ensuring their monopoly remained intact. They took even more extreme measures against others. On the island of Crete, when local production threatened to compete with Venetian imports, Venice destroyed all the Cretan salt works and banned any future production. Let's follow the money again. The wealth that flowed into Venice from this salt monopoly was immense. At its peak, revenue from taxing and re-exporting salt funded the city's stunning architecture, its powerful navy, and its lavish artistic culture. The beauty of St. Mark's Square and the elegance of the Doge's palace were, in a very real sense, built with salt money. By controlling this essential commodity, Venice could also subsidize other industries, like their fishing fleet, and underwrite the grain trade to ensure the city's food security. The salt monopoly gave them the financial firepower to extend their trade routes to the far reaches of the world. This strategy wasn't unique to Italy. Across Europe, control over salt was a primary goal of feudal lords and rising monarchies. The Habsburg in the late 1500s, for example, waged economic war against Bavaria, banning the sale of Bavarian salt in their territories to capture the entire market for themselves. The salt wars of this era were often ruthless economic conflicts, a series of strategic acquisitions, blockades, and targeted destruction aimed at controlling the flow of white gold. Venice and Genoa poured blood and treasure into the sea for centuries, all for the right to be the master of salt. Their struggle demonstrates a timeless lesson, that control over a resource everyone needs is the surest path to wealth, but a path that is invariably paved with conflict. For centuries, empires had used their salt monopolies to fill their treasuries. But there's a point where economic exploitation becomes unbearable tyranny. A point where the tax on a simple grain of salt becomes so heavy it breaks a nation's back and ignites the flames of revolution. Salt, the tool of the oppressor, was about to become the symbol of the oppressed. Nowhere was the tyranny of the salt tax more hated than in pre-revolutionary France. The Gabelle, as the French salt tax was known, was one of the most unjust systems of taxation ever devised. It wasn't just a tax, it was a state-enforced monopoly coupled with a mandatory purchase requirement. Every person in France over the age of 8 was legally obligated to buy a minimum amount of salt each year at a fixed, extortionate price. This was the sel du devoir, the salt of duty, follow the money. The injustice was staggering. The cost to produce salt was minimal, but the crown sold it in some regions for over 5,000% more. The system was also grotesquely unequal. The nobility and clergy were largely exempt. For a poor peasant family, the Gabelle could consume a huge portion of their income. Evasion was met with brutal punishment, including imprisonment or even death. Yet a massive black market thrived, with smugglers known as faux sauniers risking their lives to move cheap salt across the country. The revenue from the Gabelle was a cornerstone of the royal budget, funding the lavish lifestyles of kings and their endless wars. The magnificent Palace of Versailles was built in large part with money squeezed from the salt of the earth. By 1789, the Gabelle had become the ultimate symbol of the old regime's corruption and inequality. When the French Revolution erupted, the abolition of the Gabelle was one of the very first demands. Its removal in 1790 was seen as a monumental victory for the common person and a catastrophic blow to the monarchy. A century and a half later, another great empire would see its authority crumble over salt. In British-controlled India, the colonial government held a strict monopoly on the production and sale of salt. They banned Indians from collecting or producing their own, even though it lay in vast natural deposits along the coast. Instead, every Indian was forced to buy heavily taxed British salt. The symbol of this oppression was the Great Hedge of India. This was a literal, physical customs barrier stretching for over 1,500 miles across the country, made mostly of thorny bushes and stone walls. It was patrolled by around 14,000 guards and was designed for a single purpose: to prevent the smuggling of salt. It was a living monument to colonial economic control. For millions of poor Indians, the tax was a devastating burden, forcing them to pay a colonial master for a mineral they could literally pick up for free. In 1930, Mohandas Gandhi decided to make this injustice the centerpiece of his campaign of non-violent civil disobedience. He understood the profound symbolic power of salt. It was used by everyone, rich and poor, Hindu and Muslim. A tax on salt was a tax on every single person in India. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi and 78 followers began a 240-mile march from his ashram to the coastal village of Dandi. As they walked, thousands joined them. The world's press followed. It was a masterstroke of political theater. After 24 days, on April 6th, Gandhi reached the sea. In front of a massive crowd, he waded into the water and picked up a small lump of natural salt from the mudflats. With that simple act, he broke the law. He declared, "With this, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire." His act was a signal. All across India, hundreds of thousands began to make their own salt. The British responded with force, arresting over 60,000 people, including Gandhi himself. But they couldn't stop the movement. The Salt March had exposed the moral bankruptcy of the British Raj. How could a government claim rule for the good of the people when it was arresting them for picking up a gift from nature? The Salt March was a turning point. It didn't win independence overnight, but it galvanized the Indian population and captured the world's imagination. It shattered British prestige and demonstrated that their control rested on force, not consent. By breaking the salt monopoly, Gandhi proved that the power of the empire was fragile. He showed that a superpower could be challenged not with guns, but with a simple, symbolic act of defiance centered on a grain of salt. The history of humanity is hidden in the objects we overlook. From salt to sugar, from coffee to coal, these commodities have shaped our world in ways we can barely imagine. If you found this journey into the secret history of salt compelling, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten stories that define our present. Let us know in the comments what other everyday items' secret history you'd like to see explored next. The age of the great salt monopolies, of salt roads and salt wars, is largely over. The invention of refrigeration in the 20th century was a major blow. Suddenly, salt's primary function, the preservation of food on an industrial scale, was no longer as critical. Its price plummeted, and it became the cheap, ubiquitous seasoning we know today. In 2017, China officially liberalized its salt market, ending over 2 millennia of state control and causing prices to fall. The era of salt as white gold had come to an end. But the story isn't over. The fundamental playbook that made salt so powerful for thousands of years is being used right now, with new commodities on a new global stage. The core principle is timeless: control a scarce, essential resource for which there is inelastic demand, and you can achieve immense wealth and geopolitical power. The Salt Playbook is alive and well. Look at the 21st century's new white gold, lithium. This metal is the essential, irreplaceable component in the high-performance batteries that power our smartphones, our laptops, and most critically, our electric vehicles. Demand is exploding. Just like ancient civilizations needed salt to preserve food, our modern world has an insatiable hunger for lithium to store energy. A handful of countries control the vast majority of production, and nations are scrambling to secure their own supplies, creating a new geopolitical battlefield. It is the new salt, or consider an even more abstract, powerful modern commodity: data. The tech giants of Silicon Valley have built empires that would make a Roman emperor blush, not by taxing a mineral, but by monopolizing and monetizing the flow of information. For many businesses, access to the platforms controlled by companies like Google and Meta isn't optional. It's an essential component for survival in the digital economy. We, the users, pay for these free services with our attention and our personal data, generating hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And in an amazing twist, salt itself is making a comeback in our energy future, bringing its story full circle. One of the biggest challenges of renewable energy like solar and wind is their intermittency. The sun doesn't always shine, and the wind doesn't always blow. A promising solution is molten salt. In massive solar power plants, arrays of mirrors concentrate sunlight to heat salt to extreme temperatures. This molten salt can store that thermal energy for hours. When electricity is needed, the heat from the salt is used to create steam and power turbines, generating electricity long after the sun is set. The humble crystal that once preserved the energy in food is now being used to store the energy of the sun. So the next time you pick up a salt shaker, take a moment. Remember that in those tiny translucent crystals lies the story of civilization, a story of a biological necessity that became the world's first global currency, a story of armies and empires built on its trade, a story of crushing taxes and brutal monopolies that sparked rebellions and toppled kings. It is the story of white gold, a reminder that the most powerful forces in history are often hidden in the things we see every day. Its epic history, full of wealth, war, and revolution, is a testament to the fact that whoever controls the essentials controls the world.